Welcome back to Recruiting is No Joke. I am your host, Joe Lalgee, the realist recruiter. I've got the sign, so it's official. I am super excited to be back again with another great guest. As always, we're going to be hearing our guest story and how it relates to the world of work and HR, talent acquisition. And then just looking at some of the events that are going on in the past week or so that I think are interesting and getting our guests' point of view. But we're excited for another episode here. So I have with me today, I have Matt Pietsch. Matt, great to have you on the show. Matt, how long have we known each other for now? It's got to
Yeah,
be,
it's a couple of years now, I would say.
yeah.
And good to be with you, Joel. And we realize we run in a lot of the same circles and some of the same things. So love what you're doing, and really excited to be here today.
Well, Matt, it's great to have you. Why don't you give a quick introduction for anyone who doesn't know you or hasn't met you? Like, what do you do? Give us a little bit about your background as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm kind of a lifer in the human capital management space. Been around for about 30 years. My very first job out of college, which was actually as a recruiter.
Hey,
That's right. I was in Detroit after getting out of Michigan State, and worked for what at that time was the world's largest recruitment agency, MRI Worldwide, Management
oh yeah,
Recruiters Worldwide.
yeah.
And I was in the office in downtown Detroit, finding automotive talent, engineering, tool and die people, all of that stuff. So I've kind of been.
Was that like a mix of contract and permanent type
Yeah,
of
at
positions?
that time it was really almost all permanent.
Okay.
Was at least that's what I was focused on, was all permanent. So mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, tool and die
Yeah.
folks, and all of that stuff, automotive. So had to learn a lot about the automotive industry and all that at that time.
Who were
But
some of the big clients you worked with?
yeah, some of the GM, Ford, Chrysler, and then their suppliers.
Mm.
The engineering firms and the tool and die companies that actually supplied the big three. That's really what the focus was at that time, and learned a lot during that time. I had some really good mentors in that office that really taught me the importance of keeping what that time was a Rolodex.
Wow.
And the importance of making a lot of calls. And
How many calls? Because how many calls do you think you made early on in your recruitment career?
you
How
know
many we held to a day?
50 to 75 or more calls a day, and it
Wow.
was more about the connections. And my mind has always worked about this. As we'll talk about my career. I've really been in sales and sales leadership, and it's all about what does it take to get to the sale, right? And you can even break it down like that. And some of the sales training I've had over the years, that if I make 1,000 calls, let's just say, on a sale, and it takes me 200 calls to get to that, then I know every call is $5. To kind of
Mm.
have that mentality. It's like, all right, there was a no, I didn't get anyone. All right, that's $5. I can get on to the next one, because ultimately it'll work out that way, and that'll really help keep you focused and honest on activity and the importance of activity, and what it takes. And as a recruiter, to find talent. Of course, back then we didn't have LinkedIn, we didn't have some of the resources and in the internet to be able to do all of those things. So it was really heavy lifting and manual, but it really provided you a really good template for what it takes in terms of activity to get those placements, to fill those job orders that you got. Yeah.
I think too, it almost seems like before LinkedIn, before a lot of like the job boards that we're familiar with, almost seemed like recruiters had a unique value they were also adding to candidates, which maybe they don't provide as much value today, right? Because nowadays you can go to Google, you can go to,
Yeah.
ZipRecruiter, Indeed, million websites and find jobs that are posted. Most companies are going to have a career page. But when you started a recruitment, a lot of times you're relying on the recruiter to also have a pulse of who's hiring based on
Absolutely.
that network and their relationships. So I
Yeah.
think that there was a little bit more of a value prop for recruiter even when it came to the candidate side as well. And I get that question a lot from candidates, like, "Can you help me find a job?" And sometimes I'm like, "No, well, I it's not necessarily really what I do." Uh, you kind of find your own job, you can search for
Yeah.
them,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I think a lot of people still kind of resonate with that recruiter who has that network of kinda open jobs, which you can't just find.
Absolutely. I think even today, back then it was brick and mortar stuff too. So, most of the work that I did in the Detroit area was all localized stuff. And where possible, we'd have candidates come into the office so we could meet them face to face.
Mm,
Wanted them to represent the clients. We would go out and meet clients. So there's a lot more face to face that was pertinent there. And I think it's one of the things that it really taught me back then as a recruiter, and something that I think is sometimes a lost art today for recruiters, is to, one, build relationship and a network of potential clients that you can rely on to say, hey, I've got a great candidate. I think you should take a look at. I don't know if you have an opening, but this is a person that is going to be a perfect hire for you. And the flip side of that, for the talent, for the candidates, is to build a pool of candidates that you can rely on, build a network so that when you get a job order for a client, you automatically, as you're taking the job order, you're already thinking about 3, 4, 5 candidates that you're going to be able to present to them that afternoon
yeah.
because you know they're going to be a fit. So learning that skill of making those connections and doing them in an environment without the internet, without LinkedIn, and without the other tools that are available to us today, really provided a really good foundation for me in terms of what it took, not only in recruitment and staffing, which what I did for a number of years, but also sales in general, in terms of the importance of making those connections and having that connectivity.
So it started in recruitment. Where did
Yeah.
kind of
So
things progress from there?
yeah, worked in recruitment, worked then in sales and marketing. I ended up helping to launch an organization in the sports industry back then in recruitment because of my background in recruitment. One of the things that we did is we built front office staff, so non-player stuff. So if the Cleveland Cavaliers needed a head of ticket sales or a head of stadium operations, those kind of things, I ran my own shop for a while. And then transition happened where I was referred for a role on the assessment side, worked in the assessment space with SHL, enterprise sales, and realized right around that time where I transitioned to working with startup organizations. So about 15 years ago, realized there was an opportunity to work with early stage companies in HR tech, human capital management, and so over the past 15 years, I've been with 7 different startups, 3 that went to exit, helped, and it was really always on the sales leadership side, helping to scale the organization, fundraising, taking them to exit, getting us to the next level of that. So running sales, marketing, customer success, and sales leadership capacities. And during that time, built up a pretty good reputation and relationships with people in the startup space, to the point where over the last couple of years, I've been running my own organization called hrtechstrategy.com, where I work with companies in human capital management, HR tech, staffing, recruiting on their go-to-market strategy. So helping them scale, helping them with product market fit, helping them with product roadmap in terms of how it aligns with what the needs of the market are today. And then really advising founders, advising private equity and VC organizations in terms of who they should potentially acquire, doing due diligence in terms of, are they ready to be acquired? Is there a fit for this organization? When's the right time to raise funds? As an example, you don't want to go out and raise funds too soon. So really love living in this space, kind of that spectrum, that full spectrum of that candidate flow from pre-hire to through retire, and all of those different elements. And during that time, been fortunate to be exposed to a lot of really innovative companies that are bringing some magnificent products to the fold and leveraging the latest in technology, whether it's AI or where they fit into that ecosystem to provide efficiencies and effectiveness for their customers, consumers.
Yeah, I think it's I'm sure some of the listeners who are listening in are going to be familiar with HR tech and talent acquisition tech or TA tech. Um, but I think there's probably some listeners out there as well who might not even be aware of how competitive this HR landscape is, but how many companies there are that are involved. Like, I think one of the things that blows my mind is anytime I talk about ATSs with people, the sheer volume of ATS options people have. And I think we're familiar with some of the bigger ATSs, like I think of or HRIS systems. I think of like Workday, for example. Yeah, everyone kind of knows Workday and we see the
Yeah.
applications, but I'm always shocked when I talk to a talent leader and I ask 'em what type of ATS are you using, and it's usually a 50-50 chance that I might not have even heard of the ATS. So um, I just think it's really interesting how many different options and how many different tools are out there, and how it really is kind of a fragmented market once you get a little bit lower from like the big household names.
Yeah. You know, this is a perfect example. You talked earlier about people that may not know how competitive the space is. And ATS is a perfect example, really perfect example, because a number of years ago, a decade ago or so, there were a few players that were, that control the majority of the market when it comes to applicant tracking systems, ATSs.
Yeah.
But those that have survived and those that may have maintained their competitive edge today are those that recognize they needed to be innovative and provide more to their customers. I used to
Mm,
always say that a lot of the big players were really just glorified databases.
mm,
They basically just stored the candidates that applied for a job and kept them in there. They didn't update the data; it was stale, and that you didn't really get anything out of it. But those organizations that have evolved and become more innovative, leveraging the latest in innovative technologies, are the ones that have survived and thrived. And those that have grown in size through either development of their own products that the market demanded, or partnered with strategic organizations that complemented their offering, or made acquisitions that provided different things. And the reason this is important is that most companies out there, particularly the larger organizations, enterprise, and even some mid-market sized companies, they're really tired of working with 7, 8, 9, 10 different pinpoint solutions and having their recruiters, log into different systems. They want a unified product offering, and you hear this phrase, total talent management, and everybody talks about it. And you ask 10 people, they'll give you 10 different definitions of what total talent management actually means to them. But it's really about being able to solve some of these pinpoint solutions in a more of a holistic approach, so that in a single sign-on environment, I have my recruiter that is able to do a lot of different things, whether it's narrowing the funnel through screening, through selection tools, maybe onboarding, interviewing, scheduling. I mean, there's so many different pinpoint solutions along that path. But the more of them that I can provide effectively to my customer,
yeah.
the better and more efficient they're going to be. And I think that is what sparked this environment of, as you put it, highly competitive nature in this space, because innovation has really driven so many different products. I mean, you go to any of the large technology conferences around the world, whether it's HR Tech or Unleash or anything, there's so many new products that pop up almost weekly
Yeah.
that have a product or a solution that improves on something that's out there today, or something that somebody else maybe not have thought of. It's like, wow, this would be something that would really help me. The issue is, does it integrate? For instance, you mentioned Workday. Does it integrate with one of the larger players so that it's a product offering that can be grouped on top of what they're already doing? Because I don't want my recruiters to log into another system to try to do something else,
Yeah.
or have my candidates not have a cohesive experience that attracts them to the company versus pushes them away. So it's a highly competitive space. I would argue one of the most competitive out there because there's so many different brilliant people creating different innovative products out there, and we know some of them that we interact with that are just magnificent because they do really provide a product. But is it really going to drive efficiency and effectiveness for me? That's really the answer.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I did a tweet the other day, an X, we'll call it whatever we want.
Yeah,
And I said, and this was more around sales, but I just asked the question, like, have any of these AI sales tools actually helped with sales? Because a lot of people I talk to are really struggling with sales, and it was super interesting. I think I maybe got like 30 or 40 people commented on it, which is a lot for me over on X. It's not one of my like biggest platforms. Um, but most people were like, yeah, it hasn't necessarily like helped that much because I think of it from, if we talk about candidate experience, for example, um, we have a lot of access to tech. We've got lots of these tools, but I'm sure if I asked a lot of candidates out there, hey, has the candidate experience gotten better over time? Probably say it's gotten worse.
yeah,
And so it's an interesting one because I think there's a lot of really good ideas and there's a lot of things that sound good, and I think there's a lot of people that are creating solutions to problems they've maybe experienced. Um, but each company, like you said earlier, like each company kind of does things differently. And if you ask people what's the perfect process for hiring, um, you're going to get 10 different roadmaps of
yeah,
what a good process looks like. Some people love, like you mentioned, assessments. Some people love assessments.
mhm,
Other people don't. Other people want to do video interviews one way. Other people hate the idea of that. And so I think from a candidate perspective, I know before I got into this space, I used to just think it was all the same. Every company did the same. Like there was just a process, like a
yeah,
universal
yeah,
process,
yeah,
but there just isn't. There's
yeah.
almost like an infinite amount of ways that people can review things, the way that they move people through interviews, the questions they ask. Um, and I don't always think that candidates on the back end really get that. And I don't even think that a lot of times people who are creating, who are new to the space, who haven't necessarily worked in recruitment or HR, I don't always think that they realize that like every single person has like a different process and a view of like what a good process looks like.
Really great comment, and you're absolutely right. I think I look at it from let's look at it leveraging technology. Into your question earlier about AI, has it really made us better? And you can look at it from a sales perspective, business development perspective, and from a recruiter perspective. I think in some instances, in many instances actually, it's made people lazy.
Yeah,
It's made people lazy to where they rely on AI and do all those things. And let's talk about from the recruiter standpoint. People are worried, oh, is AI going to replace all recruiters? No, it's going to drive efficiencies. And I think there's some really fantastic AI tools out there so that if I have 50 recruiters in my organization today, I can probably do the same amount of work and do it better and do it maybe with 20 recruiters, right?
sure.
But what it's going to do, it is going to allow my recruiters that I have to be a lot more efficient because, for instance, let's look at screening and selection components. It's going to allow them to spend time only on those candidates that you want them to spend time on, right? But I think what one thing is also very, very clear is that we're never going to lose sight, in terms of my opinion, not in the near future at all, lose sight of still needing that human interaction. You're still going to need that human interaction. And I think if it's done appropriately, those human recruiters are going to be better, and they're going to have better interaction. They're going to have make it for a better candidate experience. There's so much focus on candidate experience, and rightly so, because so many experiences are just terrible out there.
Yeah.
When you think about, people apply for a job, they sometimes you don't hear from anyone. I'll give you an example. A number of years ago, I had was referred to a company for a job, and was referred directly to the hiring manager for a role that was like written for me, right? And I interacted with the hiring manager, and she said, "Hey, great conversation. I need you to fill out the application just because it's protocol, and fill it out, and then
Yep.
let's have a follow-up conversation next week. I filled out the application. Within 24 hours, I got a rejection email. And the rejection, sorry, you're not qualified. So I reached out to her and I said,
Yeah.
did you send this? She goes, no, that's an automated thing that went out. But what does that tell you?
Yeah.
There's like a complete disconnect of what should be done, and that was done with technology, right? So if it's not set up properly, and if it doesn't really do what you need it to do, those types of things will happen. And those are the things that you hear candidates talk about all the time. And very few companies do a really good job on that, and still blending technology. I think the best AI, if we're talking about AI, is one that is human-based AI, where the human is still involved on some level, and it's really driving that way. You can't rely completely on that today, and I don't know if you ever will be able to.
Yeah, it's funny. I got a one of my cousins. He just got a job with a tech startup, and he's an AE, so an account executive, very heavy on the prospecting. And he was just laughing because we were kind of talking about something similar. And he's like, "Yeah, everybody just all they do is talk about sequences, email sequences, like that, like." That's kind of like what it's become, right? Like, how many sequences can I blast out with hyper personalization, with you know, with AI personalization thrown in there, so it doesn't seem like sequence, but we all kind of know it's sequences now.
Mm.
And I think, okay, yeah, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, if you had a tool like that, whew, you were set up for success because you just couldn't do that. You didn't even have the ability to be able to do that, and if you did, you're way ahead of the curve. Problem is if everybody else knife is getting sharper as well,
That's
then the
exactly.
weapons are getting better. So then you have to evolve. And I guess I want to cover some of these news stories here, but I one thought I had when you were talking about your start in recruitment, about how crucial it was to have the Rolodex. And um, one of the things I've been thinking about is, are we going to AI our way out of some of these functions that have historically been so dependent on relationships? So, for example, could it be in 5 to 10 years that one of the recruiting strategies people have is to go to places to actually meet candidates versus in mails and emails and all of these things, because people will just they'll be so desensitized to it that they won't even be checking these messages because we'll just have AI'd it all out, AI'd out the inbox, I call it. Could you see it going back to that?
Well, I had a conversation a couple of months ago with the head of a major staffing company, global staffing company, 1,500 recruiters around the world. And he said, hey, our objective is within the next 3 years to do exactly what we're doing now, but do it with 90% less recruitment staff by leveraging just technology and AI.
Wow.
That's their objective. Um, I mean, there's some roles that are going to be gone sometimes, but let's talk about. I mentioned earlier it's caused people to be lazy because they're relying just on technology versus the relationship and the human interaction and all of that. I mean, think about how many messages you get every day via LinkedIn from someone. Every single day I get them. Somebody asks to be connected to you on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And the moment that you're connected, they send you a
Spam.
pitch.
Yeah, yeah,
They send you a pitch. And then if you don't respond to it, a couple days later, you'll get another one. Hey, you must not have gotten my last message.
yeah.
And then a few days later, it's like, hey, and sometimes some weird stuff. Hey, hello, or some weird meme or something. You know,
What's wrong with memes? Come
yeah,
on.
like, and I use memes too, but in my personal life mostly. But it's just there's no real desire to connect and pick up the phone and call. People don't pick up the phone and call anymore, and try to interact with individuals. So to get back to your question, will it replace? Yeah, there's some jobs that AI will be able to replace. I think the companies that are going to do the best are going to be the ones that figure out how to leverage AI to drive some efficiency, but not lose sight of that human interaction. Typically, when you're talking recruitment, when you're
Yeah.
talking sales and business development, Absolutely. Because people still want to have that connection. I have a conversation with my kids all the time about this. They're out in the professional world and everything, and I said, hey, it's really really important to have that connection. So, for instance, we're here on a video call. 30 years ago when we were watching the Jetsons, people would have thought this was crazy because that's how the Jetsons communicated. But now we're doing this on a regular basis, and this helps.
Yeah, I remember was it Back to the Future where
Yeah, or
they're
back.
in the future and then
Yeah,
he's like getting fired over the Zoom call?
over a Zoom call, right? But there's still, in my opinion, and maybe it's old school, but I still think you can't put a price on real face-to-face interaction,
Yeah.
shaking hands, making that real connection, maybe having a dinner together or a drink together, coffee. Which is why I like going to conferences because everybody's there and you can have those interactions and you can reconnect and really build a relationship. Because I think what is lost is this element of trust
Yeah.
because people are relying too much on technology and AI. Yes, use it because it can help you, but don't rely on it 100%.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the obviously I got a big social media network and brand, and one of the things that I've noticed, and I'm gonna encourage anybody who's building a brand or they're a creator, I think branding is really important, but it's understanding there's an offline brand, there's online brand. Your brand is what people are gonna experience when you meet them in real life. And I will say, like, I think there's a mix of strategy, right? Of meeting people in the real world, making a positive connection, um, and then offering value. People are like, well, what's value? I'm like, well, connecting other people is massively valuable. If you can be a
Yeah.
connector, somebody that connects people, educating and you know, educating people on new things that are going on, that can be value.
Yes.
Um, like there's a lot of different ways, but I think that is something which kinda having the combined online world and offline, I do
Yeah.
think it's more crucial in knowing how to work that, and particularly if
Absolutely.
you're in sales, it's just such a huge thing.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure. I say this all the time. You're talking about value because when you think about sales, and this is how I've always sold myself and how I've managed salespeople and the sales process. Customers don't want discounts; they want value. And how do you build values? You show them the impact that your product or service is going to be able to have that organization. But it doesn't happen until you've established yourself as valuable to them. And
mm.
that's really really key. Kind of just piggybacking on what you were saying there.
Yeah, it's same with job seekers, right?
Yeah,
I think that we're heading into a time where I've been thinking about this a lot as well, where job descriptions a lot of times and resumes, they talk a lot of they often talk about tasks, and they'll talk about things that you've done and you're doing. And I guess you could even equate that to skills, but I think there's an element of what's the impact and what's the value. And, are you making money for something? Are you making money for this company? Are you saving them time, which is going to equate to more money? Are you doing both?
hmm
But the more you can figure out, no matter what role you're in, whether you're in accounting or finance or product development or engineering, the more you can start to calculate what is actual value you're bringing, because I think we're gonna shift into an employment model even that's just for more focused on what's the value that you're bringing
yes,
versus. And I think we're kinda getting to this point because, again, even with the return to office, one of the interesting things that we've seen is this idea of, well, is just going to a place for an amount of hours, is that producing something?
yeah,
And so I think as candidates, if you look at how to be relevant in the future, it's really understanding that. And when I meet with people one on one, I do these job search strategy sessions. One of the first things I try and focus on is going like, what is the value that you brought? Because I think if you don't even know what that value is, it's really hard to make a really compelling resume. And then when you get
right,
in interviews, it's extremely hard to win now because the focus right now it is just productivity and
yeah,
if we're going to hire you, you need to be generating something because that's the promise that technology will bring. The promise of technology is we're going to make you more efficient, which is going to lead to cost savings or value creation. And so, as an employee, that's what you're up against.
that's right. Yeah,
You're a business owner. How many pitches do you get from people saying that they have an AI that can do something that's going to make you more money, save you time, or a combination of both?
exactly right. I mean, it's ROI, right? And in this case, if I'm the employer, it's like, how are you going to give me a return on my investment in you? You know. But I think
Yeah.
there's a flip side of that too, which is kind of a whole nother episode, which is this relationship between the employer and the employee, right? This concept of loyalty. It's like employers want you to be loyal. Well, I need the employer to be loyal to me as an employee as well. There's a real connection that you lose sight of, and so
And
anyway,
that's
that's
shifted a
another.
lot too. I mean, from I would
Yeah,
imagine when you started in recruitment,
yeah.
you're talking about the big, big automotive companies. They were well known for, hey, you could work with us 20, 30 years and then get your retirement and like you're gonna be good. That whole notion of working at a company for 30, 40 years, I would imagine for most of the listeners, for most of us out there, there's probably a small percentage of people who are even have been at a company for that amount of time.
Exactly, and I say this too, and this is one of the reasons I gravitated to early stage companies and startups. It's this, quick decision making, personal accountability. You can really impact things. And I say all the time, I say you could work at one of those big companies and do just enough to never get fired and never enough to get promoted and be there for 30 years.
Mm,
But is that really productive for that organization? We're talking about like in the news, today with, for instance, the federal government, right? In terms of that, people having to go back into the office, this announcement that was just made. And people are up in arms because no, remote work is here and it's here to stay. Well, the employer has the right to dictate on some level and make sure that you're actually being productive. And we all know that the pandemic has forced every organization that would have never allowed people to work remotely to have people work remotely. Not everyone is capable of really working remotely and being as productive, and I've been working remotely for, dozens of years off and on, because of, companies being located elsewhere and doing everything. But not everybody can be in that environment. And I think, particularly in this, as you put up the headline here, all those government employees essentially work for us, right?
yeah.
They talk about government funded. No, it's people funded, and I don't have any issue with efficiency as long as it's done effectively and smartly, and people that have gotten used to doing certain things. But at the end of the day, there needs to be validation that the productivity is at the level that it needs to be, even if you're working from home.
Yeah, and just so if anyone who is listening out there and doesn't have access to the video, I'm sharing an article, and this has kind of been news over the last couple of weeks, but essentially in the last, I think, few days, the Trump administration is now offering a deferred resignation to government workers that are just saying, "Hey, you know what? I've heard the call to return to office. Not interested." Now they have the option to where they can defer their resignation. I believe until September
Yeah,
30th, and
till
they get
September I saw.
paid.
Yeah,
Yeah, till September and get paid. Um, and yeah, this is a whole thing. So it sounds like you're in favor then for being back in the office as a federal worker. That kind of makes sense. What because what I've heard and what I've seen is one of the factors that increases productivity isn't necessarily like where you get the work done. It's this word flexibility.
yeah,
Um, so I'm curious just to get your thoughts on, obviously you work with a lot of startups, and I imagine some of those startups would be fully remote. Maybe some of
yeah,
them are in the
yeah.
office. How do you kind of coach leaders on whether or not you should even consider remote work versus, um, in the office, and like what are some of those factors that you're looking at, and how do you keep flexibility in an environment like that? Not necessarily saying that there will be flexibility for these federal workers, but just in general.
Yeah, and I say let's talk federal workers as an example. There needs to be a just an evaluation, and since it's my tax dollars of, are people being as productive as they would be if they were actually in the office, right? That's the first thing. So I think every organization needs to make a decision that is the best for them. You talk about startups as an example. So many people are remote when you're talking about startups. And I think, there's this phrase, meet the talent where they are. And sometimes the talent, if it's a software engineer, developers, they might be in another country or another part of the country that you're in. Is what is your appetite for being able to manage it? How do you measure success and productivity for them to be remote? I think remote makes a lot of sense for a lot of organizations for a couple of reasons. One, I don't have a lot of overhead with office space,
Yeah.
Which can be very, very expensive. And particularly if you're a startup and you're looking to keep costs down. If I can bring talent on board in another part of the country or another part of the world that can get the same amount of work done for less income that I have to, for less salaries that I have to pay them, that makes a lot of sense in some instances. And then I think the other thing, and one of the things that has really sparked a lot of remote work in sales, as an example, if I want them to be in those markets where my prospective customers are, that I can go visit them and do all of those things, it's more cost effective for me to have somebody remotely in that market versus putting them on a plane every week to go there, by example. So I think each organization has a right and needs to do what's in their best interest. But I think the real measuring stick is how are you measuring productivity for those individuals that are there? I'll tell you one thing. I've been working with organizations where we've had remote people all over the world, whether it's India or Europe, UK, Philippines, whatever. And the one advantage we have today is we do have Zoom or these types of video interactions. And I always force people, if they are working remotely, every time we have a call, the camera needs to be on just so that we can make this physical connection and have all of that. But you really need to do what's in your company's best interest. And if that means, 90 or even 100% of your team can be remote and it works for you, hey, hats off, more power to you. I think that's a real advantage.
Yeah, I think it's also important to note as well. Like, I think a lot of people group like younger people. So people right out of college, like they're the ones who are pushing the remote initiative. I've actually found that a lot of younger people I've talked to who are right out of college, they want to go to an office
Yes. Yeah.
because it's it's even like a social aspect, right? Like you think about the friends that you make or like the people you're spending time with. A lot of times if you're in that season of life, a lot of times you're not married, you don't have kids, and so you're not in that stage of life where you're like the
Yes.
family life. Obviously, there's people who are, but I'd say a lot of times you're not in that environment, and so then going to the office, you're not necessarily as lonely, or you can access leaders and mentors a little bit quicker. I think the driving force behind a lot of this is people like myself who have kind of like young families, young
Yes.
kids. Um, one of the news articles that's come out recently, and I've heard people talking a lot about, is one of the things to be mindful of is when we have these return to office mandates, sometimes women are the ones who get impacted more than men
Yeah.
because traditionally like women are going to be responsible for childcare and
Yes.
and and kids, and it's hard to find those things. So I think even just looking at that and going, all right, are there people within my organization that it might not be as easy for them just to return to the office? So do we need to make concessions, or even do we need to think about how do we offer benefits to kind of help them with that? Um, because at the end of the day, too, I think government's obviously different, but I do think within like corporate settings, if you're gonna say, "Hey, we care about people," part of that is like looking at like their lives and going, "Hey, are we putting them in a bad situation? Are we forcing them to quit?" And I don't know. I don't always know if those things are
For sure.
thought about in that way.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point, because one of the things that is also happening is a lot of these decisions in corporate America are made in a vacuum, where you
Yeah.
have C level automatically just dictating they should do this or should do this. they're not taking a pulse of the organization. They're not having that interaction. You're not allowing them to be part of that conversation. Now, you have the right as the employer to dictate what you want those people to do. And in some instances, hey, before the pandemic, everyone was in the office. We hired you at a time when you were required to be in the office.
Yeah.
Pandemic happened. We were a little bit more flexible on remote. Now, if we want you to come back in the office, that's all right. And it's your right as an employee to say, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go work somewhere else.
Yeah.
However, you don't want those decisions just made in a vacuum.
Yeah.
And for instance, me as an example, I live in Atlanta. Traffic here is brutal, among the worst metropolitan
Worse
areas.
than LA, you think?
It depends on the day, but rush hour here could be Sunday afternoon at 3:00, right?
Wow.
And we have a phrase here in Atlanta: it takes you 30 minutes to drive from Atlanta to Atlanta.
Wow.
And it can be tough. And I've been in an environment. I live north of town, and if anybody knows the landscape, I would have to commute down to Buckhead, and it's only 20 miles, but it could take me an hour and a half, and which is brutal. So now I'm talking about efficiency. I'm up in the morning. I'm up early. I go downstairs, make my coffee, grab my laptop. I'm working. No commute. It saves 2 to 3 hours every single day, and the stress and all of that stuff too. But I'm fortunate to be in an environment where I have that type of a role. Not everybody has that. Not everybody has an employer that dictates, hey, you need to come into the office. So it's whatever works for the organization. I encourage corporate leaders, don't make that decision in a vacuum. Take the pulse of the organization. I remember being at one of the conferences a couple of years ago where, it was right as COVID was winding down, and one HR tech leader from a major company was on a panel on stage, and he said, "Are you going to force people to go back in the office?" He goes, "I don't know. Sales are up 30%. While everyone's been working from home, it seems to be working out okay. So we might make this remote thing permanent. So whatever works for you."
Yeah, and look, I mean, the world has changed a lot too since pre-pandemic. So again, going back to like the childcare thing, I think
Yes.
it is hard to find help for your kids. And it was, I think, harder pre-pandemic, but it definitely gotten harder because a lot of those like caregiving environments, whether it's nursing, childcare, a lot of these types of industries are really finding it hard to attract people
Yeah.
because they had a really negative experience during
Yes.
the pandemic. And then childcare is really expensive as well. So
Incredibly.
sometimes it is like just a mathematical equation of, okay, yeah, if we go back to the office and let's say my job, I don't know, making 80K, but then you're having to pay 30K for childcare. Then you start doing the numbers, and you're like, okay, maybe this is
Exactly.
even worth it.
Yeah.
Um, so I think where I settle with this is there's no black and white easy answer, and I do think you have to know yourself as an individual. And same token, like I do think that not everybody is necessarily right for remote work either. I think there can
Yeah.
be loneliness aspects to it that people underestimate. Um, and then productivity obviously is huge. Why it's so important, and that's why it's so important for organizations to be really clear on how they're measuring that productivity, which doesn't always happen as well. I think people would be
No,
surprised with.
exactly. That's the challenge, is how do you really measure productivity, and are they meeting their objectives, exceeding their objectives? In certain professions like sales, it's a
Pretty
little easier.
kind of easier.
It's a little easier to measure because it's at the end of the day, what have you sold lately?
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, it's going to be interesting what happens as time goes on, for sure.
Well, Matt, as we wind down here, one of the questions that um, a lot of people ask me, and I'd be curious to just get your take on this since you do work internationally, and you're in the know. So, optimism with the hiring market in 2025. What are you kind of thinking? And obviously, you don't have a crystal ball for this, but from the conversations you're having with leaders and startup leaders, HR leaders, where's the sense? Is 2025 going to be kind of continuation of the last couple of years, or do you see things kind of opening up more? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I actually just wrote a little article on this a couple of weeks ago on LinkedIn, talking about the human capital management / HR tech recruiting market. How I think 2025 is going to be a banner year for growth, for mergers and acquisitions, kind of combining those solutions for investment in the space. I think people are kind of starving for growth. I know the staffing recruitment market has been down kind of the last couple of years, and I think a lot of that was a function of economic factors and things like inflation and a lot of those things that impacted the United States and globally on things. And I'm very optimistic about what is going to happen this year from a hiring perspective with organizations. Innovation is going to continue to be incredibly strong in the space, and we're going to see a lot of activity. So I'm really hopeful. And I've talked to a lot of leaders that really feel the same way, and I think a lot of times just feeling that optimism gets people to start thinking positively about growth and hiring more people. And so I'm very optimistic that this year is going to be a very positive year, particularly over 2023 and 2024.
I love it. I love it. Well, Matt, where can people connect with you? Where can they find out more information about what you're up to, and where's the best place to reach you?
Yeah, look me up on LinkedIn, and my company website, hrtechstrategy.com. You can link up with me there. My email, matt@hrtechstrategy.com as well. And I'd love to hear from people and reach out. I love networking, engaging, and having and building relationships with people. It's kind of ingrained to me, which is why I've gravitated and love sales and sales leadership, and why I love startups. So any of those places would be great.
Amazing. We'll put those links in the show notes. And Matt, it's been awesome to have you on the show. Lots of valuable insight, I think, just looking at everything from just how to build real relationships to how some of this technology, we need to be thinking about it, I think is massive. So if you're looking to connect with Matt, definitely connect with him. Post a lot of good content on LinkedIn as well. I know he's also out and about at different conferences as well. So hopefully if you are at any of those HR tech conferences, if you're Unleash, Transform, any of these places, you're likely to see Matt. So definitely go and introduce yourself. And then, guys, we will have another episode back live next week. So if you have stayed till the end of the show, you made it. It'd be great to hear from you as well. If you go to my website, www.therealistrecruiter.com, you can sign up for the podcast newsletter. That's a good way for us to interact. If you want to be a guest, if you want to sponsor the show, would love to hear from you. And looking forward to going live in a few weeks as well with more news. I'm going to be attending a conference in the next couple of weeks all around talent acquisition. So I should have some good news as well from that session. If you're looking to reach me, again, just go to the website, and looking forward to being with you guys a week from now. So thank you, everybody who's listening, and we'll see you then.
Thanks, brother.